What's good, YouTube? Welcome back. Today it is Lazy Daze Tubby, and I'm back at it again on my solo channel, and I am doing some more history reaction for you guys today, and it is some more Kings and Generals content for you, and it is their series, the Gallic and Civil Wars, and we are on the episode Thapsus 46 BC, Caesar's most complicated campaign. I'm really enjoying this series. Kings and Generals make amazing content and telling a great story. Caesar is one of my preferred characters and historical figures, indeed up there with quite a few. But I really enjoy this series and I'm really enjoying this journey. If you guys haven't already, head over to Kings and Generals page. The link's in the description box down below. If you're enjoying my reaction, enjoying my journey through this reaction series, then you know what to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell. But we are going to jump straight into this one.
Caesar's campaign in Africa had been off to a bad start. He had rushed the invasion, underestimating his opponents, and as a result suffered a minor defeat, was badly outnumbered and poorly supplied. However, as we have seen before, Caesar was often most deadly when backed into a corner. Rather than rushing again, Caesar now focused on collecting reinforcements and supplies, preparing for the upcoming Battle of Thapsus.
They have got a point. Caesar did always seem to be worse when he was backed into a corner.
Caesar's first priority was improving the defences of Ruspina and creating entrenchments from the town to his camp and to the sea. In doing so, Caesar ensured his communication lines would be kept safe, while also providing a safe landing ground for any reinforcements and supplies. Caesar had been surprised by Labienus's tactic of mixing light troops with cavalry, and decided to mimic it, pulling light marines and archers off his ships in order to do so.
Okay.
Meanwhile, Scipio was en route to unite his force with Labienus and Petreius, bringing with him almost all of the Optimate leaders and the entirety of their army, bringing its total to more than 60,000. Such an army would have already been larger than the one Pompey had, and to make matters worse for Caesar, there was also a possibility that the king of Numidia, Juba, would join Scipio with his own force, including its famed elephants. With fortifications improved, Caesar turned his attentions to supplies. The Optimates had previously stripped the area of corn, and most of the local workforce was pressed into their army, making the harvest of that year particularly poor. Caesar was forced to purchase supplies from wealthy individuals living in the area, and rationed them out to his army. A number of his scattered transports were hunted down by the Optimate navy, and were captured or burned. Caesar ordered the remainder of his vessels to patrol the harbour of Ruspina, to keep the area clear for the anticipated arrival of troops and supplies from Sicily. Just when things were starting to look disastrous, Caesar had a stroke of luck. The Optimate army under Scipio had paused briefly at Utica, where Cato, the figurehead and political leader of the faction, was based. While the army was there, Cato began chastising Pompey's sons for failing to achieve as much as their father had by their age.
Interesting, being insulted.
Shamed and hoping to prove himself, Gnaeus took 2,000 slaves and freedmen and attacked the nearby kingdom of West Mauritania, ruled by King Bogud. The Mauritanians lured Gnaeus close to the town of Ascarum before sallying out and quickly defeating the small force. Humiliated, Gnaeus withdrew to the Balearic Islands, but his actions had far-reaching consequences.
What a fool.
Having left a sizable garrison at Utica, Scipio now marched to Labienus and Petreius, uniting the two armies and establishing camp 5 kilometers from Caesar's position. They immediately began using their large cavalry forces to keep Caesar within his fortifications, making his supply situation even worse. Juba began marching to his allies, hoping to assist in a quick and definitive win over Caesar, but Gnaeus's actions now showed their consequence. The king of East Mauritania, Bocchus, heard of Juba's departure and invaded Numidia to avenge the Optimate attack on his brother Bogud. Commanding the Mauritanian armies was Publius Sittius, who had been operating in Africa as a mercenary since the Catiline conspiracy. He successfully captured the Numidian city of Cirta and then proceeded to pillage and sack the surrounding area. By this point, Juba had almost reached Scipio, but upon hearing the news, pulled back to defend Numidia.
Okay.
Meanwhile, some of the local citizens had begun sending messages to Caesar, complaining of the harsh rule of the Optimates. Some towns even requested garrisons, pledging to feed and house them in return, an offer Caesar gladly accepted, sending 3 cohorts in order to improve his supply situation. Initially, Caesar planned to wait for better weather to ensure his troops would make the crossing from Sicily safely, but now he ordered that they be sent no matter the conditions, showing how desperate
I was about to say, he's desperate.
he was. Scipio was not idle while all this was going on. Labienus, in command of the majority of the Optimate cavalry, kept up a relentless harassment campaign, fighting a number of skirmishes with Caesar's cavalry that ventured out to patrol. Labienus kept searching for ways of keeping Caesar's forces occupied, including attacking the towns of Leptis and Aquila, but he was repelled by Caesar's cohorts now garrisoned there. Nevertheless, these attacks were effective at keeping the pressure on Caesar. Similarly, Scipio would march his army out of camp every day and draw them into battle formation, including the elephants, hoping to intimidate the recruits in Caesar's army. Caesar made a show of indifference, keeping his men at work on their fortifications, but he never drew up his own army for battle.
Smart. Keeping them too busy to worry and just not falling for any traps. Caesar, I love him. He's just such an intelligent guy.
He knew that for any chance of victory, he would need more men, particularly more veterans. His best play was to keep his men behind their fortifications of trenches and palisades and bide his time. His patience paid off. Sallust had arrived in Kerkina, the site of a large Optimate grain supply, which was poorly defended. He easily chased off the garrison and immediately sent the supplies to Caesar.
Nice.
2 experienced legions, the 13th and 14th, were finally dispatched from Lilybaeum. Good luck with the weather, and Caesar's patrolling fleet allowed all the legions and supplies to arrive at Ruspina with relative ease. Soon after, Scipio sent 2 Gaetulian spies into Caesar's camp to assess the new situation. However, the Gaetuli, who had greatly benefited from the actions of Caesar's uncle-in-law, Gaius Marius, during and after the Jugurthine War, immediately defected to Caesar. They informed him of Scipio's numbers and the morale of his men, in particular that the Optimate 4th and 6th legions were wavering and eager to join Caesar. Though Scipio and Labienus had done well to keep up the pressure, they had delayed too long and lost the initiative. Caesar now had the men and supplies he needed to go on the offensive, and wanted to force a battle with Scipio before the Numidian army would return.
Yeah, of course.
On the 25th of January, he sent the transports back to Sicily to get the rest of his army, and then marched his full force out of the camp. His first objective was to take and fortify the semicircle ridge of hills that surrounded the town. Looking to use similar tactics to those at Dyrrhachium, Caesar quickly seized as many of these hills as he could, ordering fortifications to be built to create a line of palisades across the tops of the hills.
The engineering of the Roman army is always just so impressive to me.
Hoping to force Caesar back to his original position, Scipio marched his full army out of camp with Labienus in command of the vast cavalry force, drawing up for battle. Caesar initially thought this was a bluff, but when the enemy approached in formation, he drew his legions up on the hills for battle, sending a small detachment of Spanish auxiliaries to seize one hill still held by Scipio. The Numidians holding the position there were quickly chased away, and Labienus led the majority of his right wing of cavalry to cover their retreat. Caesar noticed that Labienus had moved too far from the main Optimate battle line, and sent his own left wing of cavalry to charge through the hole, before turning back to attack Labienus from the rear. A large estate prevented Labienus from seeing this movement until the enemy cavalry was already behind him.
No way!
With the cavalry pushing from his rear and the Spanish auxiliaries attacking from the front, Labienus was caught in a pincer and ordered a withdrawal. He and the fast Numidian horsemen were able to extract themselves, but his Gallic and Germanic cavalry was slower. They were surrounded, and despite brave resistance, cut down to a man. Seeing that his right flank was in shambles, Scipio quickly ordered a retreat and pulled back to his camp. Feeling robbed, Caesar did the same. However, soon he tried to force a battle again, this time marching his army towards the town of Uzita, a major water source for Scipio, which was located just outside the Optimate camp. Scipio marched his army out of camp, positioning them on either side of the town in a strong defensive position. Eagerly, Caesar again drew his men up for battle, but was reluctant to attack Scipio in such a strong location. For the remainder of the day, the armies stood opposite each other until Caesar ordered a retreat. Frustrated once more, Caesar returned to his camp and continued to further fortify his position on the ridge. Scipio had been delaying for a good reason. Immediately after the cavalry skirmish where the Gallic and Germanic cavalry had been lost, he had sent word to Juba demanding his help. Juba, who owed his kingdom to Pompey, obliged. He left his general Sabura, the victor of Baghrades, to fight Sitius, and marched to Scipio with 3 Numidian legions trained in the Roman style, 800 heavy cavalry, more light infantry and cavalry, and 30 more elephants. The Optimates now had 8 Roman and 3 Numidian legions, approximately 55,000 men, almost 16,000 cavalry, 60 elephants, and perhaps as many as 20,000 light infantry.
A lot of men.
A total of around 90,000 men,
That's
a truly
big
colossal force. Scipio thought that it was his turn to go on the offensive. His fleet had been hunting down any of Caesar's ships that had been blown astray in the crossing from Sicily, and the prisoners were brought to him. He now displayed a number of captured veterans of the 14th outside his camp, and had them tortured to death there and their bodies left outside. He also once again began drawing his army out of camp every day to further intimidate Caesar and his men.
He executed men from the 14th Legion in front of Caesar.
To death there and their bodies left outside. He also once again began drawing his army out of camp every day to further intimidate Caesar and his men. These actions had the opposite effect, however. The execution of his men enraged Caesar, and he was also encouraged by Juba's numbers. They weren't as significant as he feared, which meant that Sitius was distracting much of the Numidian force, and confirmed that Scipio had no more aces left up his sleeve. Following this, a deadlock emerged. Both sides regularly drew up for battle, but no serious engagement was fought, neither wanting to be the one to attack a fortified opponent. A number
Which is smart, I wouldn't either.
of cavalry skirmishes were fought, with neither side able to gain a significant advantage over the other. 2 more veteran legions, the 10th and 9th, arrived, and Caesar attempted to use them to break the stalemate, constructing 2 long entrenchments from his camp to Utiza, despite the constant harassment from Labienus's cavalry. A new camp.
What? Once again, Caesar's ability to do things under pressure and build these defensive forts with his men and obviously the Roman legions is just so impressive.
Was made at the end of these entrenchments, where siege weapons such as scorpions and catapults were constructed, and began bombarding Utiza. Caesar's constant pressure and the close proximity of his new camp to that of Scipio's encouraged some of the Optimate troops, mainly Gaetulians, but also a number of men from the 4th and 6th legions, to change sides. Scipio couldn't allow this to go on, and once again ordered his army to get into battle formation. Caesar did the same, but the broken ground in front of Scipio's army dissuaded him from attacking, despite the 2 armies now being less than 200 meters apart. After squaring off for half a day, Caesar withdrew back into camp. That is when Labienus launched an attack on Caesar's retreating cavalry and light infantry. The legions were close enough to prevent a complete disaster, but the attack gave Caesar food for thought. It was only a matter of time before Labienus was able to strike a deadly blow with his superior cavalry numbers.
Makes sense, makes sense.
Soon word was sent that the last 2 legions Caesar pegged for this campaign, the 7th and 8th, were en route from Sicily. He also heard from some deserters that Varus, who had been stationed at Utica with the Optimate fleet, planned to attack them on the crossing. Immediately, Caesar rode to Leptis himself, took command of his fleet, and surprised Varus.
Nice.
The Optimate fleet was chased away, and the Caesarian legions were guided to land safely. Caesar now felt comfortable enough to send 2 legions out of his fortifications to find supplies in the nearby estates. At this point, Optimate deserters informed Caesar of an ambush planned by Labienus, and Caesar managed to surprise his old ally, killing 500 light infantrymen and routing the Numidian cavalry. Unfortunately for Caesar, his legions were unsuccessful in their foraging, making it clear that he needed to move his entire army to find food.
What are you gonna do here?
Caesar left a garrison in Ruspina, burnt his camp, and marched out with his full force. He foraged the area around Agar and Seta, constantly shadowed by Scipio's army. After foraging around Seta, Caesar began retreating to his camp, roughly 23 kilometers away, but was once again attacked by Labienus and his Numidian cavalry and light infantry.
Really becoming a thorn in Caesar's side.
This time, Labienus kept up the attack, retreating when Caesar's men turned to confront him, and then continuing the harassment as soon as they began marching again. Caesar's cavalry took the brunt of these attacks, and he was eventually forced to pull them from the rear and use his legions to fend off the Numidians. His heavy infantry took less damage than his cavalry, but his army was now moving incredibly slowly, only managing to cover 300 meters in 4 hours. Night finally set in, and Labienus withdrew his troops. But he had been successful in doing significant damage to Caesar's already much smaller cavalry force. Impressed by how effective Numidian light cavalry and light infantry had been against him, Caesar began drilling his men in tactics to combat them, such as how far to retreat from them and when they should turn and throw javelins. He was soon met by the last Sicilian reinforcements, bringing his force to 12 legions, 5 newly raised and 7 veteran, roughly 3,000 to 5,000 cavalry, and an unknown number of light infantry. Caesar's veteran legions had taken casualties. Some might even be at only half strength, and so establishing the size of Caesar's army is difficult, but a number of around 60 to 70,000 seems reasonable. Though outnumbered overall, Caesar had more veterans than Scipio, as the Optimate army was largely made of fresh recruits and conscripts.
And we all know how valuable a veteran is.
Caesar also brought elephants from Italy. Although useless in battle and intended for the Roman games, they allowed Caesar to train his troops. His men were taught where the elephants were vulnerable, even in armor, and his cavalry practiced throwing dummy javelins at them, familiarizing the horses with the elephant's smell and sound. It is a testament to Caesar's generalship that even on campaign he still took the time to train his troops to address new threats.
That's so intelligent. That's so intelligent. Well played, Caesar.
The stalemate continued. Caesar was moving from town to town looking for supplies, with Scipio shadowing him. Labienus attempted to keep up his skirmishing campaign while Caesar marched, but Caesar's training had paid off. 300 men from each legion were assigned to not carry any baggage and instead act as a quick response rearguard, fending off all of Labienus's harassing attacks. Finally, Caesar had enough. Time and again he had formed up his army for battle, only for Scipio to decline. The towns in the area that he raided were not important enough to force a reaction, and Labienus's attacks remained a constant source of frustration. Caesar
literally just a big old pain in his asshole.
that needed to be able to force Scipio into a situation where he had no choice but to fight. So on April 4th, Caesar abandoned his camp at night and moved to Thapsus. Thapsus was a major city in the area, holding a large port, supplies, and arms and armor. It was a target that Scipio would not be able to ignore a threat to. Caesar, having marched through the night, soon arrived at the city, immediately besieging it and fortifying his own position against a possible Optimate attack.
Okay.
Outside of the city of Thapsus was the Marsh of Mocnene, which effectively forced any approaching army to take one of two narrow passages, hugging either the northern or eastern coast. Caesar had chosen his target well. He established two forts, one in the eastern passage, which was garrisoned by 3 cohorts, which effectively blocked that pass, and one surrounding the city of Thapsus. His strategy was to force Scipio to take the northern passage, meaning Scipio would be forced to attack him from only one direction. Scipio soon arrived on the scene. He initially intended to take the eastern passage, but seeing Caesar's fort, abandoned this idea. Leaving a small force under Afranius opposite Caesar's fort, he ordered Juba, Labienus, and the Numidian cavalry to encamp in a separate camp nearby. He then...
Would you have tried to take it? Or do you think what they're doing now is a better move?
commanded a forced march around the west of the marsh to the northern pass with the rest. It seems that Scipio's strategy was to try and catch Caesar in a pincer, hoping to eventually make a simultaneous push on his position through both passages.
It makes sense, but if the fortified position is fortified, surely you would leave more men down there, right?
Quickly, Scipio ordered part of his men to begin construction of a second camp, while the rest of his army drew up for battle in front of them, with the elephants on either flank in front of his cavalry. Caesar could not believe his luck. Scipio had taken the bait and was now offering battle under terrible conditions. His men were already fatigued by the long march. Part of his army was building a camp, and a significant portion of his army, including most of the Numidian cavalry, was too far away.
What has Scipio done here? This all seems like a massive mistake.
Leaving two of the rookie legions encamped around Thapsus, Caesar eagerly formed up the rest for battle. He deployed his army in the classic 3 lines. The 10th and 7th legions were stationed on the right, and the 8th and 9th on the left. The center was likely held by 2 of the other veteran legions, the 13th and 14th, with a recruit legion on either side of them. Mixing recruit and veteran legions like this was a favored strategy of Caesar's. His last legion, the 5th, was split into 2 and stationed behind each flank, acting as a 4th line. Their role was specifically to handle the elephants. In case of a charge from them, the front lines would part and it would be up to the 5th to kill them. Archers, slingers, and light infantry mixed with cavalry held his extreme flanks. Caesar and his men noticed a lot of movement and jostling in Scipio's line as men moved to and from the camp. His veterans, many of whom were already supposed to be retired and who had spent the last couple of months frustrated by the lack of a decisive battle, urged Caesar to attack. Caesar was hesitant, perhaps thinking that it must surely be a trap. It is also worth noting at this point that Plutarch claims that Caesar had an epileptic fit before the battle, which perhaps was the reason for the delay.
Wait, what?
His veterans, however, had had enough. A trumpeter of the 10th or 7th, without Caesar's orders, sounded the charge, and Caesar's right flank surged forward. Realizing that there would be no way of restraining his men, Caesar decided that he must fully commit and rode ahead to the 10th and 7th to take personal command of them. He ordered the slingers and archers on the right to target Scipio's elephants opposite them, panicking the beasts and sending them rampaging into their own lines. At the same time, the elephants on Scipio's right charged Caesar's left, but his legions quickly parted as they were trained to, the cohorts of the 5th Legion taking the brunt of their charge. They fought bravely.
That 5th Legion coming in clutch.
Using spears to jab at the vulnerable and sensitive points on the elephants, blasting trumpets loudly to further frighten them. The elephants were soon panicked and turned to run back to Scipio's army.
Gotta give it to Caesar training the men to be able to handle these intense situations.
Scipio's line was now being charged by his own elephants, with Caesar's legions following close behind. Panic had set in almost immediately. The left, fighting Caesar's 10th and 7th, was the first to break, the entire line following shortly after.
Another slaughter, another slaughter.
Some tried to fight, but most were stampeding towards the camp that was still being built. Caesar now had all the momentum, and his men easily cut down the fleeing and disorganized Optimate forces, as well as those who were constructing the camp. The garrison at Thapsus attempted to sally out to distract Caesar's army, but the 2 legions left in the camp easily repelled it. These legions then marched down the eastern corridor to the camps of Afranius and Juba. In a full-scale rout, Scipio's men fled around the western edge of the marsh, desperately trying to reach these camps, with Caesar's men in hot pursuit. It was a disaster for the Optimates. When Scipio's men reached the forts, they found Afranius' camp already overrun and Juba's being assaulted by Caesar's 2 other legions. The Numidian king, seeing Caesar...
Did the other 2 cohorts act on their own? Did they take initiative and come down here, or was that orders by Caesar? I'm very interested to find out.
Caesar's main force now approaching gave up the fight and retreated with Labienus, Petreius, and what cavalry he had left. Caesar's force stormed his camp, easily taking it. Caesar's men massacred many. Dio blames this on Caesar. However, most sources say Caesar ordered the men be spared, but that his battle-frenzied soldiers disobeyed.
Still technically your fault, Caesar. You've had control of your men so often, so many times, and what, you couldn't do it this time? But I guess this campaign was a difficult one, and it was a lot longer, weren't it? But as the leader, the buck stops with you.
It seems likely that Caesar did not order the massacre. A master propagandist, Caesar knew the power of mercy, and was renowned, even in his time, for sparing the vast majority of his Roman enemies.
Exactly.
The battle was over. Some sources suggest that the Optimates lost 10,000, others suggesting as many as 50,000, while Caesar's losses were as little as 50 or as many as 1,000. It was a decisive victory for Caesar. Following the battle, the Optimate leadership was scattered. Labienus, Varus, and Pompey's son Sextus had managed to escape and would eventually make it to Spain, where they would continue to resist Caesar. Afranius, along with Faustus Cornelius Sulla, collected the survivors and began pillaging Mauritania, planning to gather enough supplies to then also cross to Spain. However, they were caught by Sitius and then killed.
Ha! Serves you right.
Petreius and Juba fled to Numidia, confident they would find support there. Sitius had been successful in defeating and killing Juba's general Sabura, however, and the Numidians now turned on their king, barring their gates to him. With no options left, the 2 men decided to commit suicide. They had a final dinner and settled on dueling each other, so that at least one of them may die honorably in battle. Juba won the duel, killing Petreius, and then had one of his slaves kill him.
Okay. Fucking hell. Okay.
As for Scipio, he too hoped to retreat to Spain. Gathering a few supporters and a small fleet, he set sail, but was caught in a storm and forced to make port at Hippo. Caesar's fleet, commanded by Sitius, found him, and a minor naval battle was fought. When defeat here was inevitable, Scipio killed himself, the last Scipio of any real historical note.
A family tree's just died. Oh my god, this episode, all of it's like coming apart, isn't it? Crazy.
The only Optimate leader left in Africa was Cato in Utica. As Caesar's army closed in, he made his final preparations. He held a feast with his friends and then retired to his bedroom, leaving his children in the care of Lucius Caesar, a distant cousin of Caesar's, though a supporter of Pompey, telling his son, "I, who have been brought up in freedom with the right of free speech, cannot in my old age change and learn slavery instead." He then read Plato's Petra, and after finishing it, stabbed himself in the stomach. In death, Cato did rob Caesar of what would have been one of his greatest triumphs, that of being able to claim that he spared the life of his greatest enemy.
Yeah.
Caesar was extremely frustrated by Cato's suicide, apparently saying, "Cato, I begrudge thee thy death, for thou didst begrudge me the preservation of thy life." Caesar spent some time in Africa, fining those who had funded the Optimate war effort, before finally returning to Rome victorious. He retired many of his oldest veterans in a generous fashion, and held 4 triumphs, one for Gaul, Egypt, Asia, and Africa. Having defeated Cato, his position was now supreme. He was assigned incredible powers by the Senate, including censorial powers for 3 years, and dictatorial powers for 10, a wholly unprecedented level of power. For all intents and purposes, Caesar was now the sole ruler of the Roman Republic. However, though he had now twice won the civil war, once at Pharsalus and once at Thapsus, the war was not over. The sons of Pompey, Varus, and Labienus still resisted him in Spain. More battles were to come, and we're going to cover them soon, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to.
And you know I am, and I hope you guys are as well. I'm looking forward to the next reaction. This is a great series as always, so if you haven't already, head over to Kings and Genrals page, links in the description box down below. If you're enjoying my reactions, you know what to do. You need to like, comment, subscribe, hit that notification bell, but I will catch you in the next video.